Hello everyone, welcome back again to Tai Chi. So just as a primer again, this week we're going to be starting with, again, reviewing back through our first form. We're not going to do quite as much review on the individual movements. Ideally, you guys have had enough time to review the previous videos and make sure you have all of those down. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to run once through, again, talking through so you guys have an easy time following, once without. Before we finish off today, we're actually going to start learning some of the movements that we're going to involve in our second form. Instead of moving just into our lateral directions and planes, we're going to be learning a different pattern of stepping today that's going to inform how we're going to be doing some of the movements in kicks. We're also going to change how we're doing our strikes and our blocks. So some of the things we're going to be doing are going to be a little bit more along our center line, playing forward in a different way of moving. This is derived from a different form of martial arts, so it's going to move a little bit differently, so you guys have a variety of movement and pattern. The reason we do that is very specifically for that variety. The more ways our body is comfortable moving accurately, the easier it is going to have a time adapting to situations that demand different styles of movement. Obviously, not always are we going to be able to resolve any balance issues with a simple weight shift and pick up. Sometimes we're going to have to be able to move differently, moving our legs in different manners. So the ability to do that is derived from practice, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Looks like we're about to get our guest star, as always. Here he comes. Hey, bud. And I'm sure he'll be back to check on me. So, as we get started today, we're just going to start with our basic warm-up, starting with our nice lightweight shift before we integrate our trunk. Add a little bit of a torso lean, moving side to side. Next we'll go into our mini squat, bringing the hands up and back down. Okay, so hopefully everybody has enough in them so that they can start with this basic movement pattern. We're going to start again with our feet shoulder width apart, beginning with a nice salute. So bring arms up and around, forming a fist with your right hand, left hand on top. Press out to turn the palms up. Bring them back so that your elbows are eventually behind you, hands resting right above your hips, knees in a slight bend. We're going to start by bringing one hand up to the opposite shoulder, leaning all the weight towards that shoulder, turning our feet, turning our shoulders in that direction to start with our low block. Following it up by bringing the back hand out forward into a push, and the blocking hand back into our ready stance. As we shift our weight backwards, turning forwards, bringing that striking hand back for its own block, up to the shoulder, shifting weight back so we can make the turn to the opposite side low block, shifting weight, alternating the hand's placement to move into a strike. The hand currently in ready position is going to come up to the head as we turn. The out hand is going to return to its ready position, allowing us to turn from middle block to the opposite side. Both hands will come up to our push press, grasping onto imaginary shoulders with both hands, bringing the back leg up into a knee strike, stepping that back leg down, preparing to accept weight. Change the arms. The arm furthest from your front is going to come up to your head as you shift your weight back into our pivot. And turn into the opposite side middle block. Bringing both hands up. And pushing out. Grasping onto imaginary shoulders to bring yourself up for a knee strike. As your hands come back down, the hand of the direction you're turning is going to touch the opposite palm. Prepare for a high block. Bringing that hand down in front of you to support the spear hand strike. That'll go over the top, coming down the center line. We'll bring both of those hands back into an X as we launch into our kick. Bringing that foot back down. The hand of the direction we're turning is going to stay across the body, supported by the opposite hand and ready. As we turn to the opposite direction for our last high block. Bringing that arm down. Pushing straight ahead into that spear hand strike. Finishing with our X block. Our last kick. Before we return to center. Bringing both hands palm up again. And back into our ready stance. Finishing by rising out of your knees, coming hands up. Into our final salute. All right, hopefully that's nice and familiar to everybody following along because we've done that one a couple times. So one more time today, we are going to be doing that one without any cueing. So I'm just going to be going through the movements while I have you guys follow along, okay? So one more time, we're going to start. So, whenever we do anything in physical therapy, the way we try to organize things is we start with a very simple plane. In this case, we're traveling only in one direction, turning from one side to the other, adding in some lateral weight shifts as we go along. The reason we start with this, just in terms of foundational principles, is the ability to bear weight on one side at a time is part of what balance is all about. The ability to just take a step and confidently have that leg there, and the ability to shift into that weight pattern. You'll notice most of the time when kids are learning to walk, that's how they start. Everything stays nice and locked up. We're using that same principle as we inform how we re-educate people's balance here. But of course, our goal is eventually to increase the degrees of freedom. So as opposed to just changing side to side, making those real overemphasizing that weight shift, and then eventually progressing to some single leg moves, we're going to spend more time on one leg in this next position. As we go through this secondary form, the way we move our feet is now going to be a little bit more linear forward. You can imagine our final form is going to involve a lot more of our transitional movements into rotation. So what we're doing is just trying to develop a form that gives us the base building blocks of balance to the same principles we use when we're doing neural re-education. This time, however, we're doing it in a manner that's just a little bit more interesting to me. So what we're going to start with now is a new stance. The way we stood in this last one fits that linear pattern. We stayed nice and linear, turning, making almost the entirety of our movement within this one base stance. Now we're going to take a little bit more of a staggered position. So we're going to stay with our feet shoulder width apart, but we're going to imagine someone has shoved us from behind and we had to catch ourselves. You can imagine that your feet are now standing on opposite corners of a square. So if this is my shoulder width position distance here, I'm going to be about the same distance heel to heel and back this way. It should feel like a nice, comfortable position. If you have shorter legs, you may find that you need to take a smaller step for that to stay comfortable, and that's perfectly okay. But you'll notice it's almost like my feet are standing on two different train tracks, staying nice and regulated here. But if you look at me from the side, I also have that same distance splitting them down this way. Whichever foot is more comfortable for you is the foot that goes in front, which is why we have people imagine that they've been pushed from behind. Traditionally, people like myself who tend to be more right-hand dominant in these sports will often place their left leg in front, but that doesn't necessarily follow for everyone, so I want you guys to pick whichever one is more comfortable. Just like the last time, we are going to be doing everything bilaterally, but I want you guys to get comfortable with this alternate way to do things. So, as you take that step forward, you're in a nice stance. Of course, our hands will not just stay loose at our sides, but this position is going to become a little bit different because we don't have that nice centered place. It's going to feel offset and incorrect at our spine. So what we're going to allow is our hands to do something as well. We're going to let the hands drift forward, straight in front of us. If you look at me from the side again, you'll notice that whichever leg is forward, that hand has found its way forward as well, while the other hand is resting a little further behind. Both of them slightly more interior than the shoulder. So I'm not standing straight rigid here. It's a nice soft area. I like to have people imagine they're holding a rolled up newspaper between their elbow and their body. You don't want to be in tight and squeezed. This looks uncomfortable and is. We want to allow ourselves to be a little bit looser. You'll notice how my spine straightens up as I do that, encouraging the posture that we're always trying to get as well. So a nice loose position with my feet relatively even. I should feel about 50-50 here. I shouldn't feel more weight on my back leg or more weight on my foreleg. I should be right in the center line. Okay? So this is our new stance. I'd like you guys to be comfortable in the opposite as well. So if you started with the left foot forward like me, just switch sides and come to that same position. You should notice that same rolled up newspaper type space on this side. Hands should be a little bit interior of the shoulder. But what you should notice now is that if the right leg is forward, now my right hand has moved forward. The first thing we're going to practice is walking between these two positions because it's going to come up quite often in this next form. So if we start in our classic stance, what we're going to do is shift our way over to one side. Because I'm going to put my left leg in front, I'm going to shift my leg to my right side. This allows me, just like in our last form, to pick this leg up. Now what I'm going to do is step it forward and around, bringing myself back. As I switch sides, what I'm going to do is as I come here, my front hand is going to become the one on top, my bottom hand right below it. My fingers on the bottom hand can touch the heel of the palm if they're not fully relaxed. As I move into the next side, I'll then shift them back into their even position, where now my right hand is in front with my right leg, my left hand in back with the left. Switching, bringing the back hand underneath, transferring my weight to bring them back to center. Shifting, and coming back. If I want to move backwards, I do the exact same thing. My front hand comes underneath and steps behind. Dragging underneath and behind. So this is our new step pattern. What you should see, if you look at it from the side, is a nice even amount of space. So, whether my right leg is in front or my left, it's the same distance on both sides. My hands, as I go through this movement, are just cycling one underneath and the other as I come to that even. So as I come even, my shoulders can now be even. It's easier to have that middle position. As I shift, these hips are slightly forward, and my hands will do the same. That's our very basic walk. Sounds silly, but now that we're relearning to walk, it's going to be a little bit different. The other thing that we can do with this is we can play with which part of our foot comes down in front. You'll notice the majority of the time I'm stepping my toes and then shifting my weight. Stepping my toes and shifting my weight. This can also be done very comfortably by stepping the heel first. Traditionally in the sport form, we'll tend to put the toe down in front. It gives us a little bit more propulsion, more like a sprinter. Depending on the type of sport you'd be training for, you would alter which version of this movement you're doing. So someone who is going to be walking more frequently is more likely going to want to train with that heel strike first pattern. This may also be true of many long distance runners who tend to do still a heel first, heel strike step and rolling through. Where time on their toes, they're probably going to take this toe touch pattern that allows them to ease that transfer that way. Whichever you find to be more applicable to you is the correct version. As most of the sports I train for are still more along the sprinting aspect, you'll notice I still naturally do that toe first movement. But if you guys find it more comfortable to strike your heel first in front, that is just as acceptable, and it's just more specific to your version of this form. As both are correct, please choose the one that makes sense to you. Next, we're going to work on a little bit more complicated portion of this, our blocks. The blocks have changed slightly. When we're in more of this traditional stance here, we expect more of things to come down the center line. Things coming along the side are going to be well by turning into them. But what we're going to start with here is just something coming straight down the middle. If our hands are in this middle line already, it becomes very easy to catch those movements. So, the block has gone from a very large movement to push across to a very gentle rotation, pressing down as we go through, thinking like a windshield wiper. We can do this off both sides. To what we call a soft block. You'll notice as I'm doing this, my weight has gone from this side-to-side transition to being a little bit more angular. As I'm pushing off one side, that side I'm also sitting more of my weight back onto it, rotating so that more of my shoulder moves away. We're imagining if something's coming down the middle line, by shifting my weight this way, I'm going to get more of a graze than a direct hit down the center. If it's coming at my head, ideally it's missed. As we go the other direction, my weight again shifts forward onto this side, allowing my block to come down and in front, my shoulder to drop backwards. The hand movement stays fluid, just like in the last form, but it has become a little bit smaller as we refine our movement to incorporate more of the body at once. We can also take this into a double block pattern, where we would block one strike and then try to hold onto that arm by trapping it. So if I imagine a punch coming in at me and I push it downwards, as I bring it down, my next hand will come in and attempt to grasp onto something, whether it is a shirt, the arm itself, or a sturdier jacket. This allows me then to respond with a strike while they don't have something to block with. So this double block pattern comes down 1, grasp 2. Down 1, and the other hand will grasp straight forward. Down and grasp. Down and grasp. Down and grasp. Down and grasp. Last up, what we're going to learn is our very first strike from this position, a straightforward punch. There are a variety of different styles of punching in martial arts. The way we are going to do it is just a nice straight punch. What we're going to do is not even rotate our arm. This is just going to stay, again, nice and linear for us to help everything with the learning process, as opposed to coming by pushing our palm forward or the fingers of our hand. We're just going to close the striking hand, draw it in a straight line forward, letting our shoulder cock just slightly ahead at the very end in a movement we call protraction. We can do this from either side. And you'll notice again, there's a slight rotation in my hips and torso to allow me to get that last bit of protraction at the end of the strike. The last thing I've always been encouraged to talk about when we're doing strikes like this is how to make an appropriate fist when you're striking a surface. Obviously here we are going with our empty hands, we're not trying to strike anything, but if anyone wants to go into striking, say, a boxing bag or doing something a little bit more interactive at some point, and these movements can still be used on a device like that, I want to make sure that everyone's doing it safely. So I'm going to come a little bit closer to the camera. We're just going to talk about a very straightforward way to make a correct fist. We ask people to first gently roll their fist down that way, and then lay their thumb in front. So it becomes a nice tight ball, thumb in front. The other thing you should notice about this is by doing it that way, I keep a nice alignment along between my elbow, my wrist, and the very front of my fist. One of the reasons I want to make sure that people are doing this, if you are ever striking a bag, keeping your thumb on the inside can actually put a lot of torque this way and can actually risk a pretty nasty injury to the thumb itself. Having the thumb on top does similar. It can also injure the first finger. So we want to keep the thumb out of the way, and the tighter the ball, the less impact we have absorbing down into the fingers because it's already become nice and steady, versus a looser hand folds a little bit easier. So if anyone is interested in taking this into working on mitts or working on a bag, we want to make sure that we're doing this in a nice, safe manner, nice tight fist, and good alignment. And that's also what I'm working on as I'm straightforward here. You'll notice you can't see my arm behind my hand. I haven't cocked my wrist either way, staying nice and neutral as I stare straight down that. All right? So as we come back into our stance, if I want to throw that strike forward, I'm closing my hand into the fist on the way out, coming back through and doing the same on the other side. As we've mentioned in the past, as we do this, it's okay to take this even slower than I am. If you need to take that extra time to make sure you're making a fist correctly and safely, that is perfectly okay. We're now going to switch sides. But perform the same movement. As I said, throughout this version of the form, just like the last one, we're going to perform everything bilaterally. What that means is that both sides are going to get a nice equal amount of work. So even if traditionally in martial arts you don't see most people training both sides, because we're doing this for exercise and therapy purposes, there's absolutely no reason to become dominant on one. Because we want to use the balance and the endurance we're training here to work both sides nice and evenly. Now to take a step backwards, while we have this new leg forward, let's also try our single blocks. Remember, these are called soft blocks because we're trying to let the movement push past us. We're just redirecting it down, allowing it to slide past our body as we've moved it up the center line. Now, it may look slightly like I'm leaning my trunk as I'm doing this to avoid this imaginary incoming punch. But if you were to draw a line straight down the top of my head, what you would really just see is rotation coming from side to side, just as we warm up. The difference is, because I'm a little bit offset, it takes me a little bit further off the line one way or the other. So it's that same base concept of rotational posture we work on in our warm-ups. But now we're applying it to an offset stance. Next, we're going to work on that double block. So one hand down, next hand reaches over to grab. Down and grab. Down and grab. So the very first movement pattern in this form incorporates the double block, but of course we have to start with the single so we know how it moves, into a strike. But as we do that, we're also going to be moving our feet in that same pattern we worked on before. So ideally, everything we've learned today is going to come together into this very first section. So what we are going to do is, just like always, I'm going to back up so you guys can see my feet the whole time. We'll start with that same reach up and salute. But as opposed to before, where we reached our hands straight up, we're now going to bring one leg in and assume our new ready stance. From here, we're going to assume a strike is coming straight down the middle. We're going to let our lead hand push down into our first double block. From there, we're going to step with our back leg, moving ourselves slightly forward into our opponent, allowing the hand that did the initial push down to come into a strike. You should now feel like you are in the opposite stance from where we started. From here, if we imagine that same strike coming in, we're going to do the same movement pattern, pushing down, grasping over, bringing the back leg forward, and landing into that strike again. Trying that from the top. Up into our salute, shifting the weight off to one side so the free leg can step forward, and coming into our new ready stance. Front hand is going to push down for the first part of our double block as we reach to grab that imaginary sleeve. Stepping forward and into our new strike. Now the opposite hand is going to push down, grasping over the top, leg coming through for a step, and coming through with the opposite strike. We'll do that 2 more times with me talking, and then 1 time I'm going to move from the side so you guys can just see me walk it through without talking it through. And salute. Accept weight onto one leg and step forward into your ready stance. Starting with the front leg, blocking down into our windshield wiper, reaching over the top, stepping the back leg through, and as we plant, coming through with our strike. Same thing, front leg, that arm blocks, pushing down, backhand grabs, leg comes through, takes a step, and the new back arm strikes. 1 more time. Up into your salute. Accept weight onto one leg. Step forward into stance. Front leg. That arm blocks. Back arm reaches over to grab. Back leg comes through. Sets into that opposite stance for a strike. Front leg arm, blocks down. We reach over the top for the grab. Step the back leg through. Into a strike. Last up again. I'm going to do this from the side. You guys can keep following along the same manner. I just want you to see it from a different perspective. We come up and around. And that's going to be the first of 3 movements of the new form. You notice the last form included, the first portion of it was just the block and the strike. Same thing is going to follow through here. We're just going to start with this more complex block into a strike and perform the opposite side. The next movements are also going to start to include our legs in some new ways. We have 2 new versions of a kick to learn. It's going to be a low-level crescent kick coming in and a low-level crescent kick coming out. We're going to explain how those are performed next week. And then we're going to use those to add in again to our form to start the next part of the movement. As we begin to add these in together, you guys will be able to eventually add it all together into one form. We'll already have worked this, and then as we finish, we'll be able to work into our new forward stance. I hope you guys had fun and are learning a lot. Remember, we save these videos, so if you need to review and come back, please just feel free to scroll down the page and open us on up. I'll be here every time saying the same thing. Have a great one, everyone, and we'll see you next week.